Good evening, members. Okay, I'd like to just run through a few bits to start off with. First of all, for those that are watching in, my name's Councillor Stuart Frost and I'm the chair of this meeting. Fire evacuation procedures for this evening. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs and we will meet in the War Memorial Park. Members, please note this meeting is being webcast live on the internet. Okay, and please either switch off your phones or turn them onto silent. Okay, right. Just make sure that mine's turned off. Okay, there we go. So for those who are watching, okay, the people to my immediate front, okay, both left and right, okay, are the members of the committee, okay, and we have my vice chair sitting one away from me, okay, and then officers sitting either side of me. There's some officers to to my left or to members right, okay. I have to keep remembering, you know, left and right, okay, and then we have some members of the cabinet, okay. So that's all good there. So we're here to review and comment on the local plan update paper on the spatial strategies for the Regulation 18 consultation. We have an extremely full agenda tonight, so to give all the members an opportunity to comment, I will be restricting members to one comment or question per section or spatial policy / proposed site. If members have asked their question and wish to have a supplementary, then I want that member to ask me as chair. If there's time and all members have been given an opportunity to comment, I will then ask some more questions. If we run out of the allocated time for that section, I'll stop the questions and move on to the next section. I just want to share my plan for tonight's timings with the committee. I intend to go through the paper section by section, starting with section 2, and I want to spend as much of the time, okay, on sections 4, 5 and 6. So my plan is section 2, guiding the strategy, okay, to spend up to 10 minutes, okay, commenting on that section. Section 3, again, spending up to 10 minutes on that section. Section 4, and also Appendix 1, because that's the draft spatial strategies, I want to allow up to 50 minutes. Section 5, also including Appendix 3, okay, which is meeting housing needs and commenting on sites, again up to 50 minutes. Then section 6, the approach to rural areas. Again, I want to spend up to 50 minutes because there we have the local towns and villages. Okay, and then section 8. Okay, I think we can spend 10 minutes. Okay, on there. Okay, so basically, if anyone's adding up to maths, okay, it's just over 3 hours 10 minutes if all the time is used. Right, so let's crack on. Okay. If everyone can hold on, because it's going to be fast and furious, or I'd like it to be fast and furious. Okay, section 2, the proposal guiding the strategy. Does anybody have a comment on guiding the strategy? No comments at all? Okay, Councillor McCormack, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if this is the time to do it, but I think the overarching concern of this committee and this council was the overall number of houses that was allocated and that the figure of 17,800 was too high.
Thank you, Councillor McCormack. I'll come back to you in section 5, okay, where we discuss the housing need, because there is a specific section there on the housing number. Okay, so I will come back to you. Councillor Tomlin, please.
Thank you, Chair. So overall, that strategy there, it does sound fairly logical, but my one question is, how are we going to actually prove we did it? Because sustainable locations, we are going to be probably here till gone midnight if we start talking about that on every site. Suitable growth, the wording, suitable growth in rural communities, it's all too...
nebulous.
That's a good word, yes, thank you, nebulous. So, yeah, I see what it says, but it'll come out in the wash, but I don't think it has teeth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tomlin. Has anybody else got a comment for section 2? Councillor McIntyre, then Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so following on from the sustainable locations, the part on page 30 where it says the strategy will support the Council's climate change strategy, enabling the borough's key environmental assets to be protected and enhanced. I just want to go back to the presentation from David George that we had on the 1st of September. And in particular, one of the recommendations, which was rethinking the spatial strategy to place less demand and impact on those areas most vulnerable to water supply and wastewater impacts. My question to the officers will be, how can we demonstrate as a council that we have taken into account our expert evidence and demonstrate to our residents that we're not just playing lip service to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ruth, do you want to comment?
In relation to that particular bullet point, it's more than just water quality. It's the entire environment, you know, of the borough, and obviously climate change and sustainability, and you know, the whole extent of it. And I think that your question is really around, in my view, when you read the plan as a whole and you actually see where allocations are and the policies that would relate to those allocations, and the potential criteria of the policies for those allocations, they need to be addressing that, which is the reason why those policies go through an integrated appraisal process, which is what's been, you know, done in relation to those allocations at the back end of this agenda, the Woods work. It's not a problem that people still continue to question that. I think that that's only healthy, that we're continually questioned as to whether our policies are going far enough or deep enough to address the issues that are being raised. I'm not going to say here, right now, that everything's all watertight and zipped up, because that's the reason for the process, isn't it? For us to actually reflect on some of that, and I think it's a good question for us to take away, really, in relation to our work. But in terms of the stuff that you have here before you tonight, the Woods assessment, which is the very last appendix in the papers, goes to some extent to look at some of those points, as well as obviously the full site appraisal. But in terms of an independent people, we're already starting to use independent people to check that.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Okay, are there any more questions? Oh, Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm substituting this evening for Councillor James, just for the record. Get that on there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that Councillor Harvey is substituting for Councillor James, and Councillor Kotechka is substituting for Councillor Peter. Okay, just to get everything correct for the record. Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Chair. When I reread this, coming into this evening's meeting, one of the things that strikes me about the language is that, as colleagues have said, at face value, because of its high level, there isn't necessarily a sense of, well, I fundamentally disagree with that line or that sentence. But if you set it against the context of the housing numbers, and again we're back into the same debate, the context changes completely. So the debate about the spatial strategy becomes one of offsetting, in my mind, or throwing it around the borough. So in a sense, you're left with a position where we either go for big sites, in which case can those sites be sustainable, and all the language we choose to use, and the infrastructure actually isn't mentioned in this first section at all, and it's been a big part of our debate thus far. Or you go for the villages, and we screw over our villages with the amount of housing that we're asking them to take, or you do over the town centre. But fundamentally, you come back to that same point, that the language is so high level that with 18,000 houses, it could be quite damaging to large parts of our borough in the context of the debate we've been having around the table. So at some point this evening, whenever it's appropriate to do so, I just feel so strongly, and I'm sure others do, of saying no to the spatial strategy because of the housing numbers. and that would be an opinion I would come to, but I want to hear whatever the debate is. But when ready, Chair, I'd love to move a motion that rejected the spatial strategy because of our position on the housing numbers. I can't see how you can square the two. You can't. It's a pick and mix, and I don't think that's what we're into. I think the fundamental problem is the numbers, and once that's addressed, the rest of the debate goes from there. But I respect where officers are coming from. I know what you're doing. I get it. But that doesn't change how we feel about it, I don't think. And you know that anyway. So that would be my position this evening, Chair. And when you're ready, I'd love to move a motion accordingly.
Thank you very much. Okay. Councillor Konechka, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to save my question to section 5, but I think given the conversations we've been having so far... Okay, all right in that case.
Okay, if we can save that question for section 5, that would be most helpful. Okay, has anybody got any more comments on section 2, please, before we move on? No? Okay, so let's move on to section 3, the sustainability appraisal. Does anybody have any comments on this section, please? No? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so let's move on to section 4 and appendix 1, okay, and, which both contain the draft spatial strategies. I'd like to take these both together because I think that it's important to discuss each of the strategies, okay, one at a time. So does anybody have a comment on one of the spatial strategies, please? Councillor Carruthers.
Just to confirm, my question is on section 4. That's correct, yes? Right. Sorry. So my question is on 4.4. We say here, it is recognised that the parish councils of Headley, Highclere and Silchester have expressed concerns about the principle of the new settlement policy boundary around those settlements. However, this is considered to be a suitable and consistent approach reflecting the size and level of sustainability of those settlements. I was just a little bit concerned reading that because it sounded like we'd kind of overruled the parish's concerns. So I suppose I just wanted reassurance from officers that we have worked with our parishes and taken those concerns into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carruthers. Okay. How do you want to... Okay, Joe, would you like to provide an answer? Thank you very much.
Just on that, I mean, this committee has seen the settlement study before that we've done. We talked about that as a different committee. And following the methodology that was in that included these settlements, settlement policy boundaries. So that's kind of where that comes from, and that's the evidence base that sits behind it. But absolutely, we keep on having conversations with parishes. We very much note their concerns, and we'll continue to have those conversations as we go through the process. So this sort of reflects the evidence base. But as we said, we're early in the process, and we'll continue to talk to them about it. And so we very much note their concerns and ongoing concerns that are raised.
Thank you very much. Okay, does anybody have any... Councillor McCormack, please.
Sorry to be a bit nitpicky, Chair, but looking at SS1, if this is the appropriate time to discuss it, there's 4 asterisks against the number of homes and infrastructure and homes from Greenfield site. At what point will those become solid numbers?
Thank you very much for your question. Okay, Joe, please.
As we know, it's an ongoing discussion about the housing number, so that's why that's not included at the moment in that. That's literally the number that will be plugged in when that's decided in due course.
Councillor McIntyre, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will try and make this succinct, but it's actually it's a subject that's very close to my heart and my residents as well. So policy SS5, the policy sets out the council's support for neighbourhood planning. Now, I don't think this local plan does show that support for neighbourhood planning, and I'll tell you my rationale why. Strategic gaps. So there's a definition on page 96 of the strategic gap. The gaps have not been defined to protect the countryside or landscape. They're essentially a planning tool to prevent the coalescence of settlements and maintain the separate identity of settlements. And that's the exact same wording from our current extant local plan, which is on page 104 of that. This council conducted a strategic gaps, published a strategic gaps topic paper back in October 2014, where the conclusion was that strategic gaps will contribute to the achievement of sustainable development by preventing the areas in the borough where there's greatest risk of coalescence. The strategic gap policies can help safeguard local distinctiveness. Now, our rural villages, the character of those rural villages was appreciated by a motion that was passed by this council earlier this year to ensure that the character of rural communities, in particular those villages closest to Basingstoke, is not materially impacted by housing development. And the second part of that motion was to ensure that villages closest to Basingstoke are afforded stronger protection from housing development through policy mechanisms that protect the character and integrity of the villages. How can we turn round to those parishes and say we defined a strategic gap in 2016 and here we are now in 2022, we're changing that strategic gap? This is about protecting the character of our villages. We should set that in stone unless there is clear policy reasons for us to change that. And that's something I feel quite strongly about. And it's most probably the one reason why at the moment I do not support this spatial strategy along with the housing numbers. I don't think it gives respect to our rural communities, and I certainly don't think it sets out support for neighbourhood planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McIntyre. Does anybody else have any comments on the strategic gaps? Councillor Harvey.
On the strategic gaps, I do agree. I think there's a complete contradiction, isn't there, between the idea of having a policy that supports strategic gaps and then having the idea of Greater Basingstoke that eats up parish fields. You're in that position of, well, what's real about that, other than the fact that we are destroying the strategic gaps? We're having a policy as a fig leaf. So either we have a policy of strategic gaps, we stick to it and have a principle that is actually something that stands up to scrutiny, or we say don't and stop fooling the villages, because I don't think it's fair on them at all in that respect. I think the other issue I pick up on in terms of those particular sections, 4.12 and 4.13, if I can share on the town centre bits, again, it's the language in all of this that's used in these documents. Look to see what changes. But if I go to the left on policy NP2 on page 91 of 104 or page 145, typically be mid-rise up to 6 stories in height with the potential for taller buildings near the station. What in the world do we mean by that for our town centre? Or typically up to 4 stories in height. Now, I have the officer's assurance that it's what they say it means as 4 stories, but that's not what that sentence says. Typically, could be, maybe, taller buildings near the station. What in the world do we mean by taller buildings near the station? If it's anything like Skyline Plaza or Crown Heights, then that's a different context to 4-storey buildings. I don't want cramming in the town centre, as much as I don't want the rural areas overpowered, and I don't want to see large settlements that cannot be sustainable because of infrastructure. Don't we always come back round to the same argument we're having? But it's important to put it on record, because that policy opens the door to far more than 2,000 units, I think, in our town centre, and I would oppose that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harvey. Okay, I'll come on to discuss or to invite further comments on policy and MP2 and also MP1 later. I'd like to just try and bottom out all the comments, please, for policy EM2. Does anybody have any more comments on EM2? Councillor Cubitt, please.
Yes, I just want to support what fellow members say, but I would also like to flag that every year in the annual monitoring report, we report breaches to our strategic gaps, and we build every year houses in strategic gaps that are not supposed to be built on.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have a comment on the strategic gap policy? Councillor Tomlin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it is to back up what everybody says. The strategic gaps, in my experience, of local plan and local plan follow-on are just written over. So there is no security in strategic gaps. If there's no security in them, I don't even know why we have the policy. I think the policy should be there, but I think it should have, it should be something that's kind of endemic to us. I've seen it. That's accurate. Thank you, Anna. You're doing very well on my dictionary tonight. Yeah. Brilliant. No, keep doing it. Yes, absolute sacrosanct. Yes, indeed. Yes. Don't ask me to spell it, but anyway. Yeah, I live. My fence where I live is a strategic gap, except when they're going to build houses on it, because it was seen as part of let's build housing in the strategic gap. We have a strategic gap between Sherfield and Bramley, which is strangely the MOD land. Well, you know, that's a pretty good policy, but I'm afraid, you know, they've got to have some teeth, and we shouldn't keep messing with them, or really it defeats having them in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Does anybody else have any more comments on EM2, policy EM2? Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. When you look at strategic gaps, I'm looking at 2 or 3 on there, where I think the current local plan is all but obliterating strategic gaps, and the ones that spring to mind are the top 2, Oakley and Sherburn St John. We're looking at sites in Sherburn St John that are basically Rooksdown. They're basically going to be joined up. So I'm not sure that there will be a strategic gap. The plan might say it's a strategic gap, but the public perception would be not. Similarly, basic at Oakley, after many down, I'm not sure what the strategic gap will look like there. I mean, at the moment, as you come out of Worthing, you get to Scraps Hill and it gets rural. It's a 60 mile per hour speed limit. You go over Scraps Hill and then you're in a 40 mile per hour. So there's where we've got 40 mile per hour speed limits along much of our sort of outer reaches of rural settlements. I can see a time when basically it's never going to be 60 mile per hour anyway between Basingstoke and Oakley along Worthing Road. And similarly further south, and look at me down south, there's proposals for substantial builds of 7,500 houses between Basingstoke and Oakley, Basingstoke and North Waltham. And I don't want to get into the specifics of that, just to say that it will be extremely difficult to connect those to the Basingstoke settlement, irrespective of the traffic concerns and the sewerage concerns and the water supply concerns, just the physical location of them and how they're going to actually connect to the limited number of roads in the Kempshot area. So I'm not sure whether the strategic gaps actually do what they say on the tin in this local plan.
Thank you very much, Councillor McCormick. Does anybody else have any comments on EM2? Okay. Councillor Harvey, I think you've already spoken on there. I just want to take the comments. Yeah, we'll come on to SS5 in a minute. Okay. So I've noticed that you want to speak on that. Okay. I just want to finish off EM2 first. Okay, so and get the committee's comments. So if there's no more comments on EM2, let's move over to SS5 and Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make the link that we're talking about strategic gaps and we're talking about where parish boundaries may be or community boundaries may be, and those communities developing neighbourhood planning. Over the years, I haven't heard any voices against neighbourhood planning in this council, but what I've heard is a tremendous amount of frustration about what neighbourhood planning can achieve and what it can't achieve, and where it leaves communities very frustrated. The issue now is that, say, in a parish area, we're now identifying Greater Basingstoke and we're eating into those strategic gaps and we're saying that field's going to have 200 houses there, but that's not part of your parish. That shouldn't be part of your neighbourhood plan. That's part of Greater Basingstoke. That's a complete... It just is so... It's frustrating as anything out of you, because the reality is those 200 homes are in the parish of X, Y and Z, and they are, of course, going to have an impact on whatever neighbourhood plan is created. So we've just got to have some honesty, I think, with the communities, that if this council votes for those major spatial strategy sites in those parishes, those units are in those communities, and we shouldn't lie to them and think that they're going to have a sense of developing a neighbourhood plan that hasn't got an impact on that, because it will. So I just think there's some truth here that needs to be had in this, and I'm not sure it's there at the moment.
Thank you very much. Move on to SS5. Okay, does anybody else have a comment on SS5? Councillor Carruthers, please. Thank you very much, Councillor Carruthers. Councillor Tomlin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, neighbourhood planning. I mean, in this document, it also refers to allocation of housing to be provided in the villages by neighbourhood planning. There's one fundamental problem is that these neighbourhood plans, they don't own land, they don't have the right to develop. They could say develop 5 houses on a field, and this field is in a developer, it's in the Sheila, and it could have 600 houses that a developer wants to do. So I don't see that mechanism working, and the conversations that we've had with parishes are that if you don't do it through neighbourhood planning, we, the borough, will place these houses for you. Now, slightly draconian, I feel, but we need to work with parishes and neighbourhood planning to actually address this, how we can actually do it, what is actually possible in your actual parish, rather than go away and sort it please and report back, and by the way, keep it in line with the local plan. I don't think the mechanism works. I have a great belief in neighbourhood planning and on DC when we were able to. It does carry a lot of weight, and it is this, it's the localism. It's a chance for people to actually tell us what's important, what endears themselves, what views are important. All of those things are worthwhile, but placing of houses on land you haven't got is very difficult. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tomlin. Okay, does anybody else have a comment on SS5? Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I must be missing something here. It's almost like an elephant in the room, or Emperor's New Clothes, whatever you want to call it. Tadley's not mentioned in there. Is that because of the AWE factor, that they don't want homes built?
Thank you, Councillor McCormack. Yeah, Tadley's actually mentioned in the approach to the rural areas. Okay, so we can cover that off in section 6. Okay. So does anybody else have any other comments on the spatial strategies? Councillor Cubitt.
So I'm a little bit confused, Mr. Chairman, as to the order you're taking, because I thought we were. But anyway, Councillor Harvey made a reference to the town centre strategy, which is in the spatial strategies, and I 100% agree with him that the residents of Basingstoke, both in the rural and in the centre, do not want to see high-rise blocks of flats. And I 100% agree with him that we want to see Basingstoke remain a market town and not look like some of our nearby less attractive places. And so I would like the spatial strategy to undertake to build no higher than 4 stories in apartment blocks in Basingstoke Centre, because that would then adhere to and respect the statements by the leader that he wishes Basingstoke to remain the market town that it always was. And we have examples of 4-storey apartment blocks being built extensively in Hook at the moment, and we can learn from what they're building, and I don't think we should be building any higher than 4 stories anywhere. And in the event that we do build 4 stories, I wish in the spatial strategies for us to undertake to ensure they have lifts, so that parents with children and buggies aren't expected to carry their children and their buggies and all their food in their bags up 4 flights of stairs.
Thank you very much. That was in MP2, if I remember correctly. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else have any more? Whilst we're on MP2 and it's been open, does anybody have any more recommendations or comments to make on MP2? No? Okay, that's great. Okay. Does anybody else have any more comments to make on any of the other spatial strategies? Sorry, Councillor Canesco.
Thank you, Chair. More a question really on MP1, as we're talking about the town centre at the moment. top of page 88 in the green box, we talk about enabling new decked parking provision serving the town centre to be developed as independent structures rather than integrated with other uses in larger buildings. And I was just interested in what the rationale behind that was, because in my non-expert head, that's sort of going back to potentially back to the 1970s, horrible concrete blocks that we used to have, that we've got rid of over the past few decades, and we've replaced them with more of these mixed-use combined parking sites. So it's just interested to see why we're deciding to go back to independent structures.
Chair.
It relates to the town centre strategy. So the sort of general aim in there, I think, to almost break down the town centre into more smaller usable blocks, so they can be used for alternative uses and things like that in the future, rather than having it as it is now, where it's kind of quite inflexible. So it's more of a move to that.
Okay, does anybody else while we're on MP1? Okay, Councillor Harvey. Just
To me, what page we're on? I'm so confused.
On 142. No, small number 142.
Are you working off a different agenda page book that us? I mean, was it reissued? So it's the 9th of June?
Yes. Page 141 of the bottom numbers.
I'm so confused.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors were privileged to have a workshop a while back now where we all had the presentation from the various consultants that were working on the town centre. And it was an interesting conversation at the time with one of the consultants who happened to come from London, which is a perspective on this, where the argument was, well, we don't want parking in the town centre, we want to discourage it, we want to make everybody walk into the town centre. And we're going to use the ring road and we're going to basically force cars out of the town centre. That was the direction of travel to go in. And there was quite a bit of pushback from quite a number of members, cross-party, cross-group. And I just think when you read the policy, what it confuses, I think, is residential parking, in the sense of what do we do to support those people who live in our town centre, as opposed to what we want to do to attract people to shop and spend and keep the local economy going in the context of our town centre. And so when policies are written to talk about reducing the overall number of car parking spaces, or we talk about decks, where are those decks going to be? Because I certainly don't want them at the back of the station, given the impact that's currently having. And given the fact that Network Rail can grant themselves planning permission, that is quite an enticing line in this particular policy. So I'm just confused about parking policy in the town centre, not only from the fact that we're halfway through the town centre strategy being developed, but we're trying to write a policy in the local plan for that end. And I realise that you're only going out for what potentially would be consultation on a policy, but I've just got an awful lot of confusion in MP1 here, I think, in terms of what we want to achieve and what we might set free that we wouldn't want to see at all. So I think it needs a really good, hard, close look at.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Does anybody else have any comments on NP1? Okay, Councillor McIntyre and then Councillor Tomlin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I just want to pass on my comments that I'm actually happy to see the walking and cycling infrastructure as one of our key policies as part of MP1. I absolutely agree that it's imperative that we put this infrastructure in place, and it actually needs to be safe. What I would like to recommend to Cabinet is that we actually keep on top of this, though. I'm aware the Basingstoke and Dean local cycling and walking infrastructure plan was published, and I supported my residents in particular to pass comment to this. But what I don't want to see is that LC whip just fall at the wayside, because there's absolutely some key cycling and walking infrastructure that needs to be put in place to connect our outlying rural areas. Thank you.
Councillor Cubitt, please.
Yes, I'm specifically vehemently opposed to H and would request that to be removed, which is consolidation of existing public car parks in order to reduce the overall number of car parking spaces and encourage alternatives to the car. I don't disagree with alternatives, but I don't think Basingstoke is the market town that should have car parks removed. I agree with Councillor McIntyre. It's great to have the walking infrastructure and the cycle infrastructure, but to get rid of car parks in order to facilitate that, I completely disagree with.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin, I do apologise for getting the order wrong, but please.
Right, I wouldn't have your job for anyway. Right, well, yeah, the comment I've got actually is right in the beginning in the sort of overarching text in MP1 there that says be highly sustainable, resilient to climate change and embrace innovative ways to improve the environment. I'd like to see something like, you know, we've committed to net zero by 2030, kind of time's running out, and we're not saying anything like that in that shape or form. It's let's try. We must do it. We've got time is not going backwards, it's going forwards. And then, just as a comment, I haven't been to the capital city for a long time, and I went yesterday, and I went on the train to Waterloo, and if we're going to have high-rise buildings and build Basingstoke round the station like they're doing on the entrance to Waterloo, God help us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Does anybody else have any questions on policy EM1 before we move on? Sorry, MP1. Okay, Councillor McCormack.
Just to echo Councillor Tomlin's point, the stretch that he refers to in Battersea has changed almost beyond recognition. But I have had discussions with our head of planning on this in one of the one-to-ones that was offered. I think we're reasonably confident that's not going to be the case in Basingstoke. However, I suspect other members might want to see something in there about how we might limit the high-rise development in and around the station. There does seem to be a national trend in the southeast, at least, for cramming all your high-rise near railway stations. East Croydon's another example. There's quite a few going up in Reading. Woking's another example. So I think we are vulnerable to having developers coming along and wanting to build higher rise near the railway station. Although having said that, we actually already have a lot of high rise around the railway station. That's the legacy 70s office buildings that are being converted or replaced. So I don't think we've got much of a leg to stand on to have a like-for-like replacement of those.
Thank you, Councillor McCormack. Okay, does anybody else have a comment on another spatial strategy? Maybe SS2? No? Okay. Shall we move on to... Yep. Sorry, Ruth. An SS2. Okay, sorry, I do beg your pardon, committee. Okay, I've obviously overloaded everybody. Okay. Okay, right, so... Sure. Not at all, Councillor Hubert. What I'm trying to do, okay, is discuss and get comments on the spatial strategies that are most important to members. Okay, so we've discussed a lot of them. What about policy SS3? Does anybody have any comments on that? Okay, Councillor McIntyre.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Can I just clarify? Have we covered policy SS1? Because policy SS1 is talking about the scale and distribution, and in part A it says supporting regeneration in line with policy SS2. So this is page 59 of the bottom numbers. So it does make reference to policy SS2, which I actually can't see.
Thank you very much, Councillor McIntyre. We did actually have comments on SS1. Okay, I'm for the ease of members. If anybody else has, hold on, Councillor Watts, I've got you there. Okay, if anybody wants to make a quick comment on SS1, okay, I'm happy to reopen it. But the whole idea is to try and take the spatial strategies, which are important to members, okay, and give feedback and comment on those. So, okay, Councillor McIntyre, if you've got comments on SS1, I'll take them and we'll whack those into the recommendations.
My comment would just be reiterating about the strategic gap and the settlement policy boundaries. I'm happy to have my comment already addressed. I've already made it. So for the speed of expedience, I'll withdraw.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Watts and then Councillor Tomlin, please.
It's going to SS2 regeneration. Our old policy actually named areas. If I remember rightly, the new policy doesn't actually name areas. Obviously, Northern, South Ham and I think Winklebury were named. But in this updated policy, it's not actually named those areas. So I would like to see some more detail on what regeneration we're doing.
Thank you very much. Councillor Watts. Councillor Tomlin, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure this is the right place, but I will say it in case I miss my opportunity to say it, and that is, in a nutshell, we are looking in the rural areas, so this is sort of still within the scale and distribution, I think, of development, and we have the policy, the fundamental policy of make big bigger. And I wish to say, I think that is totally wrong. It's a good starting point, but it's too vague. And we've made a lot of our strategy and our issues and options, it's fitted that wish. And I don't think we've ever debated whether that is the right thing to do. Now, I don't know if that's in there, because I can't find the words. But that's really where I am, that I don't think we should make the big bigger. We should look at the actual needs of any particular settlement and work it. It's hard, but we have to do it.
Thank you very much. Okay. Is that all the comments for SS1? Councillor Harvey.
Can I link SS1 to SS2 as others have done? There were a lot of concerns about SS2 when members wrote into officers. Some of the language that was being floated around at the time in debate about SS2 in terms of densification and in terms of what we understood regeneration to mean. And I think that policy needs another good look at, because the concern I would have is that we are taking, as Councillor Watts has rightly identified, the names of those areas out. It becomes a general policy. And if that policy does then lead to densification and it does then lead to things that we do not want by accident, that would be shocking, wouldn't it? So let's have a really good detailed, make sure that SS2 is regeneration that we want to see and we understand it better than we currently do. And again, I know, Liz, we'll come back on it because you're taking the comments on board and we need to look at just how you then reinterpreted the policy from where it was. But just to put it on record, there was some serious concern about the regeneration policy and the way it was written.
Thank you very much. Okay, so does anybody else have any more comments on SS1? No? Okay, let's move to SS3 then. Does anybody have any comments on SS3? Councillor Katechka, please.
It names three of the areas basically where we're going to be building, sort of thing, and it's coming back to the other points that the other councillors have made. I feel like it's a case where they want to protect their sides, their villages, their greens, the town centre. Where will the buildings go? Are you looking at expanding that side of town again? Many down, Hempston Fields and the golf course and further, Popham Village? That's a question I would like to ask, because I feel like it's we're all right, Jack. Doesn't matter what happens to you guys on the other side. That's how I'm feeling at the moment with some of the comments made. And that's what I wanted to really ask my fellow councillors.
Thank you very much. Councillor Harvey, then Councillor Tomlin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just respond to that? Because I think that's a really important point that's just been said. Many members sat here over, 18 months now through this process so far, best part of a good year. And one of the things that was commented on first of all was that this entire debate could lead to an absolute pitting sites and villages against each other. And that was the very last thing I think any member, any of the 54 of us want to see. And if we're going to get into that debate, then I think we are doing our residents a real disservice. So I agree with you. And I hate being in that place if we are going to go down that road. And I'll do everything I could do to stop it and share that with you. So I'm with you on that. But the point is, Chair, if we're going to say 18,000 houses, it's that it always comes back to that point, doesn't it? Because then if you take a different number, a much, much lower number, then the very debate we're having around this table, around this committee, becomes a totally different conversation. And at the moment, that is the elephant in the room, isn't it? So I completely agree with Councillor Katecha. We shouldn't be pitting villages and towns against each other. That's fundamentally self-defeating. It's the borough that we've got to, and it's the government and others that are imposing the 18,000 houses on us, the real pushback needs to be. And that's the point about what I said last week about growing a spine. We need to find our spine and push back on them, don't we?
Thank you very much, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Tomlin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Right, the angle on SS3 is the one for me about master planning. So we put down certain places that must be master planned, but are we missing the fact that we're putting more sites against some sites from the previous local plan that haven't come forward, and we've got no master plan there? Or are we going to put master plans that actually do look at this, do look at how the whole area is being affected, as opposed to you can't master plan just the one site, but we've kind of, because of all sorts of developer games, we have not delivered, and we've got a lot of sites now coming forward that really could do with a master plan rather than the few that we've listed. So I think we should look at spreading more and even retrospectively doing it where we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tomlin. Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments on SS3? Councillor Watts, was that
I'll just continue the debate, actually. I mean, if the government doesn't change the figures, I'm afraid we're going to get housing all the way up to North Waltham and Oakley. So that's an extension of Hanson Fields and the golf club. So that is, and we're going to have development in rural areas, and we're going to have development in the town, which we haven't gone into a lot of detail. And we talk about high rises, 4, 5, 6. We haven't had a detail on how many thousands we're going to get in the town centre. So the fundamental is to get that number reduced if we want not to have this extraordinary figure. And we also want to address the affordability criteria, which we have, which I presume is an ever policy, which I would come on to when we come on to that.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. I think if you want to make comments on the affordability, factor, that will be in with the housing number. I think that would be a good point there. So when we come on to it, we'll come back to you. I've got comments, please, on SS4. Councillor Cubitt and then Councillor McIntyre, please. Sorry, I beg your pardon, 3.
Chairman, just really to confirm that I agree with all the other members' comments already, and I wish for the head of planning to take that on board. And I also want to contextualise it, that if we proceed and persist in this trajectory, I cannot understand how on earth we can simultaneously ensure that we undertake to enable the borough's key environmental assets are protected and enhanced, or that we meet the climate change strategy. The two are contradictory.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Does anybody else have Councillor McIntyre, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate my fellow councillors' comments. This is about the good of Basingstoke and Dean. And we need to absolutely get this right. I think as a council, we are agreed that the number's too high. And I just want to pay respect to the portfolio holder, because it's almost a poison chalice. I don't pity you, your job. I do appreciate you coming here and listening to us, and I take note of your comments that you made on the 1st of September, that you are listening to the committee on the comments that we're making about numbers. It's a fact that we cannot stop development. The population is growing, and every time we do one of these local plan updates, unfortunately, the previous local plan will have taken the easy sites. So I think it's just going to get harder and harder. My comment on the actual policy is about Many Down South and the IDP. I appreciate officers' advice on the 1st of September that it's not ready yet and it will be with us for review. However, I think it's very important that we get overview of that IDP and the infrastructure that's in planning for Many Down South. I think certainly it was this committee where we had personal comments from a Hampshire County Councillor that were misconstrued as statement of position from Hampshire County Council regarding the school. So I think it's very important that we get that ironed out right now, if this is actually how we are planning our strategic growth for our borough. I'm quite lucky to sit on the Many Down Overview Committee as well, and Councillor Taylor has that in hand to get that statement from Hampshire County Council, working with our officers to make sure that the correct infrastructure is identified and is planned in, so that we have that set in stone. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kadesh, please.
I'd like to follow up, I'll follow Councillor with regard to Many Down South. I think sometimes we haven't looked at the other infrastructure, such as the green infrastructure, as well as other infrastructure such as schools, etc. It's a catch-22 situation we've put ourselves in there. We're talking about biodiversity, etc., and of environment, and then next minute we're building high levels, or high numbers, I should say, of houses. We need to come out with a balance, especially in South Many Down, when it comes to number of houses. I'd rather have the numbers down, have more green infrastructure and other infrastructure where we can cope with the residents as well. Because we don't want a situation where there's too many housing and then we've got problems with the GPs, schools, etc. So that's my point of view, just wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Okay, has everybody made comment, who wants to make comment on SS3? If so, we'll move on to SS4, please. Has anybody got a comment on SS4? Councillor McIntyre, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I do have a comment on this one, and it'll allow my fellow councillors to catch up running through the paperwork. So this is about ensuring a supply of deliverable sites, and this really is just a comment to the portfolio holder and to officers. Many Down North, let's learn our lessons from that as we plan out over the next 17 years and making sure that we don't fall foul of that 5-year land supply issue again. I have the utmost faith in our officers. My conversations with them, they're all extremely professional. There's an opportunity to understand what went wrong and make sure it doesn't repeat itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McIntyre. Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this kind of exemplifies the dilemma in the sense that we face because of the nature of sites, I think, and then the deliverability of them because of our experience, as colleagues have just quite rightly said. And all right, brand new Prime Minister, let's put our trust in what's going on. Boom, that's the first one of the night. But in all seriousness, if the 5-year land supply is going, if the policy ground is shifting, and we don't know what is going on, to be perfectly honest, I mean, for goodness sake, is it going to be Jacob Rees-Mogg or is it going to be Simon Clarke that winds up with the D-Look? I mean, God help them in that department, to be perfectly honest. But in all seriousness, whatever policy is handed down, larger strategic sites will take significantly more time to come through the system than smaller sites. And in terms of land supply and the manner in which we balance all of this, just talking positively about what I would want rather than being, having to always talk about numbers, some of that master planning bit that can be done early on that encourages developers to get their sites in order to bring them forward around the principles that we want. I mean, I'm a big fan of Town and Country Planning Association principles, the whole idea of garden villages, and when they are done properly, so quality design, infrastructure-led, green infrastructure-led in particular, all those things that you would want to see in a master plan. I'd like to see these policies tied up in a way that force the developers to get on with that master planning process so that we weren't chasing our tail months down the line, waiting for them to do that work, and those sites fall further behind in the schedule and further behind in the schedule, and our land supply gets further behind, so on. I just think it can tie up well, and I know our officers have expressed that themselves. We just need to see the policies, I think, achieve that end and be tighter in that regard.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tomlin, please, and then Councillor Cubitt.
Thank you, Chair. The very bold statement here that says the development will be managed to ensure a 5-year supply of sites can be maintained. So, okay, we know we have no control over the developer, and that's a bit of a groove that's worn on a record, but it's true. So am I reading that as soon as we sadly possibly lose the 5-year land supply, we trigger a new local plan? Could someone answer that for me, please?
Joe, if you'd like to enlighten us, please.
And that's what the policy says, yes, that we need to look at that and whether it's something that we need to review in light of that land supply position. So you would have to kind of look at that through that process.
Certainly, Councillor Tomlin, supplementary question.
Sorry, I'm playing microphones. So would that review then take the statutory time that it takes to do a local plan? In other words, it will be another 4 years before we resolve that one? Could we find that we're in this unfortunate loop which goes on potentially until some of us are no longer with us, as you may say?
Under the current process, we're monitoring it annually. So, yeah, if things change, we would have to come in at that point. That may change, with the government saying that that may go, and you might just do it through your 5-year review process. So we would have to see how that evolves.
Thank you very much, Joe. Okay, does anybody else have a comment? Councillor Cubitt, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I don't understand why, and I'd like the officers to explain why they've removed the development of appropriate brownfield sites, because that's still government policy, as far as I'm aware, that we're supposed to consider brownfield. So I can't understand why we would remove that. Secondly, the 5-year housing supply is government policy, but might not be, and therefore I think it would be prudent for us not to mention it in SS4 at all. And thirdly, I'm not happy with the amendments on page 103, section 3, where the word annual's been removed, left, right and centre, with regards to the Environment Agency and the local water quality issues. So I don't want to see things weakened, and I believe annual monitoring status is absolutely paramount.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cubitt. Okay, does anybody else have any more comments? Sorry.
I had a question of the officer.
I beg your pardon, Councillor Cubitt, I thought it was a comment. Okay, can we have an answer, please, Joe?
If the question just related to the removal of the brownfield element from it, it's because that's now in SS1 and up front, whereas that wasn't the case before, so it wasn't really needed again in this policy. That's why it's been removed. the reason why it reflects what it does currently in terms of the government policy is because this is written obviously under the existing government policy. If that changes, then that will change as the process evolves. So that's why.
Councillor Cubitt, would you like a supplementary? Okay, hold on, please.
Spatial strategy. We've had the problem with spatial strategies before, where government policy has changed, but because we've got it written in the plan, we weren't allowed to refer to the new spatial strategy. What I don't want is us to be pregnant with an undertaking and a commitment to do X when there's a new statutory policy which deviates from that, and we're made to adhere to the earlier position. So I would like our plan not to be prescriptive, especially in view of the fact that we're being advised, a number of us, that government is intending to remove the 5-year housing supply requirement.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cubitt. Joe, would you like to come back on that? Or no? Okay.
So I would like her to, Joe to say whether that is feasible and we don't need to refer to the 5-year.
I think we'll have to take that away and think about it. I mean, it is the case that when we write the plan, we have to reflect that current position, and things will change as we go through the process. As we're quite early in the process, things will change and we can change policies accordingly. The problems we've had in the past is because we've been towards the end of the process, it's already gone through exam or it's already been adopted, and then you can't change it without reviewing the plan. So it depends what stage you're at, but we can review to what extent, how far we need to go on land supply in the actual policy.
Thank you, Joe. Okay. So does anybody, Councillor Kotechka?
It's, again, regarding the policy EM6, regards to the quality of water. It's, again, we're in a catch-22 situation that I feel. What implements are we going to have to make sure the quality stays at a certain level and we don't go below that level with this extra housing that we potentially going to have? Because at the moment they're saying it's going to, the quality is going to go down. Is there going to be any implementation at all to make sure it doesn't go down? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there a comment from officers on that, or do you want to go and think, or Ruth?
Could you repeat your question so that we understand what policy you're talking about?
So it's on policy SS4 regarding policy EM6 regards to the quality of water and the monitoring of it, and they're saying it's going to go the actual quality is going to go down of the water, and I just wanted to find out what things are you going to put in place to make sure it doesn't go down in quality with extra housing that we could potentially have.
Do you want to take that away? And, okay, so I'll take that away and provide a written answer. Thank you very much, Councillor. Is there anybody else that wants to make a comment on SS4? No? Okay, so that's SS4. Okay, we've made comment on SS5. What about SS7, please? Has anybody got a comment on SS7? Councillor Watts, please, and then Councillor Cubitt.
The areas around the nuclear facilities do have housing need, and it's not being addressed in this local plan. So that was the policy I would take out. I mean, they have needs like everywhere else. And if you live in Tadley, do you really want to come to Basingstoke? You know, that would be my argument, and there should be some development in these particular areas.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Just so you know, a bit further on in the report, okay, in the rural areas, there is a site which is proposed called Skates Lane, okay, on the south of Tadley, okay. you may also want to make comment on that, okay, when the time's there. Councillor Cubitt, please.
Yeah, I would agree with Councillor Watson. I would actually add to that. It'd be interesting to hear someone who's an expert, maybe Councillor Carruthers can help me on this, but I was told that if there was an incident in AWE, Basingstoke town's hit within 30 seconds. So I kind of find it really bizarre that we're not allowed to build in Tadley, but there's 30 seconds and we're all wiped out in Basingstoke. So I think it's ridiculous. And I think we should either just stop building in the whole area or allow them to build in Tadley. But a difference of 10 seconds and 30 seconds is a nonsense.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Councillor Carruthers, please.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this is something that people in Tadley have been dealing with for a long time now, and it is a frustration. We were told that we needed 900 houses. Obviously, nobody wants 900 houses in Tadley. However, myself and other councillors from Tadley at the time all said we didn't think reducing it to 0 was the answer, and that we do absolutely have a housing need. Lots of people move out of Tadley because they cannot find housing in Tadley, people who've grown up there. So I do think something needs to be done. The problem is that I have sat in meetings with representatives from the emergency planners, and it's very hard to argue with their reasoning. And we are not scientists, and going by what they tell us and the information that they provide, it is in the best interest of our residents. So it is a really difficult one. But regardless of this, we have built 89 homes in the last few years that have gone in a little bit willy-nilly. Things do manage to get through, but it does seem a little bit like there's not a lot of rhyme or reason as to what does get through. And this is one of the reasons that I would like to see a little bit more sort of planning, and to see things actually in our local plan so that we are controlling where things are going in Tadley. As Councillor Frost said, there is a large application coming up in Tadley later on. So it's really difficult. There's a lot of people in Tadley that quite like the fact that Tadley can't be built in, but I don't believe it is in the best interest of our residents. We've never actually done our own research into this as a borough. We go on what we are told by the emergency planners and the advice of West Berkshire Council. And I do think that perhaps we should consider doing some of our own research on this to really make up our own minds a little bit more on where we go forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carruthers. Does anybody else have any comments on SS7? No? Okay. Sorry, Councillor Cubitt.
The question, because I don't profess to be an expert, but how many seconds is it before we get blown up in Basingstoke? If there's an incident. I'm not joking. Because I visited the site. I think what they do is amazing and great.
It is a very serious issue, okay. As a resident of Tadley, okay, I'll be honest with you, I never actually took any notice of how long it would take to go from Tadley to Basingstoke, bearing in mind the fact that I was probably going to be, ashes, okay, right at the very beginning, should something happen. But Councillor Carruthers, can you clarify anything on that score?
The meetings that I've sat on with AWE, the risks are not that. They tell me, they assure me that the risks are not that there's going to be a big explosion, that is not what could happen. The risks are actually more to do with air and water and contamination of that sort. And actually the advice would be, if that happened, to stay where you are and to shut your doors and windows and not leave. And the reason that Tadley, one of the reasons we have this emergency plan is because they actually realised that people wouldn't do that. And what people would do if they were told that there was an emergency is actually get in their cars and go. So they're having to plan for how people would behave rather than what the risks are. But from what I understand, the risks of an actual explosion, something as major as that, are negligible. That is not the risk that we are preparing ourselves for.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cubitt, I don't have an answer to your question. Okay, I would suggest that maybe officers go away and have a chat with West Berkshire Council and planners to see whether we can get an answer for it and come back to you. Okay.
Because the reason I'm asking the question is we're told we cannot build there because of the danger. And we're being told that, and have been told since I've been a councillor, not that we should be building there because of the danger. And I'm just saying, what is that danger? And Councillor Carruthers is saying it's just about leaching of water, but I've always understood it wasn't just that. And my point, as I made earlier, is that with 30 seconds, they're 15 seconds. And if that's the reason why we're not allowed to build in Tadley, then I think we should reconsider it.
Yeah, Tom.
So have been involved obviously in the local plan and emergency planning arrangements, so I've got some familiarity. Obviously the points that Councillor Carruthers has touched on are correct in the sense that there is technically no reason that there would ever be any kind of incident of that nature at AWE at Aldermaston in terms of an explosion that you're describing. Yeah, the risk is much more around the release of particulate radioactive material, so it's about how that would be blown off site, and therefore the concentrations that local residents potentially would be exposed to if there's a fire on site or something of that nature. So there is requirements obviously through the emergency plan potentially to evacuate people depending on what the circumstances are, and those are the factors that get sort of looked at in close detail in terms of how they would respond.
Thank you very much. Councillor Harvey, please.
Can I just, in some ways, support what Councillor Cubitt is saying, because there is no invisible force field that goes around a perfect circle around Tadley that suddenly the fallout or whatever particulates will appear will stop dead. They won't. The very nature of a plume is that it's a plume. That's the very nature of it. And so there's just, it's arbitrary. That's the point. It's a simple planning, arbitrary thing, but it has major impacts for communities. And I don't think it's wrong of us to question the impact that has on those communities, from affordable housing in Tadley compared to some arbitrary force field that is not going to stop particulates affecting Kingsclear, Sherburn, St John and other communities, because were there to be an incident, of course it would. So it's just the methodology being used here is very arbitrary.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Watts, please. Sorry, Councillor McIntyre. McCormack. I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I have to say, I can't believe the nature of the ill-informed comments by Councillors Harvey and Cubitt. If you want to understand the risks associated with Aldermaston, read up on it first. The only scenario I can see where Aldermaston explodes is in the event of nuclear war. And that would be something that would affect all of us, and that's not something we can plan for. The idea that a reactor would explode Chernobyl style, you would need to have evidence based on the design of the reactor. You are not experts, so why mention it? It's completely irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. Councillor Carruthers is right. We've had Tom also mention the risks associated with a nuclear incident are fallout, either water-based or air-based. There's a limited degree to which we can mitigate against that. I would also say, Councillor Harvey's point, it might go as far as Kingsclear or whatever. Well, we might also get nuclear fallout blowing over from Normandy and the nuclear power stations there, but that's not a reason to not build anything in a local plan.
That's the point. That's what we're saying.
But your comments are so ill-informed. You are ill-informed and you won't even recognise that. Anybody who's done an O-level or GCSE in physics would have a greater knowledge about AWE than the two of you have. So... Sorry, Councillor McCormack, please. Yeah. So I don't personally. Personally, I don't have a problem with building in South Tadley, but you know, the ward member is up for it, and I agree with her points.
Thank you very much. Okay, I first of all would like members to treat each other with respect and courtesy, please. Okay. That's everybody. Okay, so I think comments saying that people are uninformed, okay, and are foolish and uneducated are not helpful. Okay, so I would like, to move on, please. Okay, so if no one's got any more questions, okay, on, sorry, Councillor McIntyre, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was just to clarify some comments that councillors had made previously. My understanding is that it's not we can't build within Tadley. We can propose developments within Tadley as long as it meets the DEPZ and in consultation with the ONR. So I think we definitely shouldn't be excluding site allocation for Tadley going forward, but we should consider obviously the constraints that are imposed in that, but still continue to try and put forward some smaller developments within the settlement policy boundary to address those requirements for affordable housing, as an example that my fellow councillor gave. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McIntyre. Okay, I've got one more policy that we haven't had any comments on, which is SS9. Okay. I've just been informed that the SS9 will not be part of the leisure park. Part of the Regulation 18. Okay, so we will leave that there. Okay, just.
Sorry, the question is why is there not a leisure park policy in there?
Sorry, there isn't a policy, is at the moment, according to the report, because of.
Exactly, there isn't a policy. The report is saying there won't be a policy on the leisure park with the Reg 18 because there's work going on. It would be premature to have that in this stage.
If you're very quick, Councillor Harvey.
Say that policy was very important in shaping the form and shape of what the leisure park was going to be. So I wouldn't want to see it drop because that policy, in effect, has an effect on what the leisure park is. And given what was previously proposed for the leisure park, which was nothing to do with leisure, that policy was incredibly useful and incredibly powerful. So I don't want to see it dropped at all. It was a good policy. And we might well be coming up with a master plan, and we might well be coming with that's for somebody else to come up with. But I'd like our local plan to keep its position on SS9.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Cubitt, please, and then Councillor Watts being the final speaker on this particular policy.
I'd like the Head of Planning to explain to us how the mechanisms work. If we have a Reg 18 and it goes to Cabinet and it doesn't have a policy in it, and we're told all the way through everything's iterative, can we introduce new policies of Reg 19 that haven't gone through the Reg 18 phase?
Yes, we can. We can introduce new policies at that stage.
Thank you. Councillor Watts, please.
But just echo those points. The current policy says it should be a prime leisure location, destination, and the town centre should be the town centre for shopping. And I would like that policy to stay the same. I don't see why we should change and why we can't go out to Reg 18 and say this is our policy, because it's in line with the policy we have at the moment.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watts. Okay, what I'd like to do now is hand over to Councillor Canesco, because he's been scribbling frantically, okay, comments and recommendations, okay, just to sum up for me. Thank you.
How do you sum that up? I'll do my best. If anyone does disagree vehemently with what I say, but please do let me know. In terms of general comments, there obviously has been further pushback on the housing number, and we need to continue to push central government about that. There has been the challenge is the make bigger the right approach for us, and should we be looking instead at the individual needs of the individual settlements? Going then through the policies in terms of the order we tackled them, EM2, there was the suggestion we should be strengthening the strategic gap policy to make sure that we do not inadvertently give permission for these gaps to be breached in the future. SS5, how do we make sure that the neighbourhood plans work in practice and that the local communities have a genuine say and that they're listened to and that happens on an ongoing basis. We then spoke about the two town centre policies, MP2, MP1. With MP2, concerns were raised about the high-rise blocks and making sure that we strengthen the wording to make sure that there's nothing higher than 4 stories. We don't want to become like Nine Elms in London, we're a market town. With MP1, there was need for greater clarity between residential parking provision, which is needed, and visitor parking provision. We want to make sure that the local cycling walking infrastructure plan is integrated with our policies and is not just left by the wayside. We need to encourage alternative uses, but not necessarily at the expense of reducing parking provision in the town. Stick with a carrot rather than the stick. And there was also a request to strengthen the intro rather. So we're talking about the climate emergency, and that this is something we must do, not something that we would like to do. Moving on to SS2, we want to add back in the names of the areas that are prioritised for regeneration. And there was also concerns about densification by accident, so that's an area that we need to review. With SS3, we're looking to expand the master planning to more sites, potentially sites that have retrospectively sites that are already in the process. SS4, we want to make sure that we learn the lessons from the lack of a 5-year housing land supply. Question, should we remove the reference to the 5-year housing land supply from the document to make sure that we're sort of future-proofed in case government policy around that changes? And there was a request as well to reinstate the annual review of the monitoring of the water body qualities. SS7 want to look at the feasibility of building new homes in Tadley and undertaking a review as well to find out what the restrictions actually are. And then finally, SS9, we spoke about the need to make sure that we have a policy at some point on the leisure park before the local plan is adopted. And I think that's the highlights. Sorry? The cuddly toy.
Thank you very much, Councillor Konechko. Okay, yeah, there's probably a tease made in there as well somewhere. Okay, so what? Yeah, absolutely. What I'd like to do now is move on to section 5, okay, which is meeting housing needs, and I'd like to look at first of all the overall housing number, which seems to be the elephant in the room. Okay, so does anybody have any comment on the housing number? Councillor McCormack.
Well, I think that the will of the council and this committee is well known on this, and I would move that we reject the 17,800 figure and ask that Cabinet re-engage with the new government with a view to understanding why that figure has been put to us and what scope we have for having a lower figure, especially taking into account the new census data that's available. I'm not sure what the implications are for that in the plan, but I see some emerging strong evidence that we will struggle to meet those numbers in terms of transport, in terms of sewage and in terms of water supply. So I would move we reject the number.
Councillor Harvey, then Councillor McIntyre, please.
Can I agree with Councillor McCormick and second his motion if he's putting that as a motion to the floor of the committee, because I think he's right. I just think you're right, it's the elephant in the room. We've been round the houses on this for nearly a year. It's colouring absolutely everything in what we debate, discuss, and full stop. Unless this thing changes, then we are going to be forced into a position that realistically we're going to have to choose between our residents and doing something that we are told is potentially unlawful. Well, I don't think it is if you're standing up for your residents and things that actually, for Basingstoke and Dean, it's the right thing to do. And it's a very difficult choice, but it's one that I feel very comfortable making because I know where my loyalties lie, and they lie to my residents and to the borough, and I know all yours do too. and I'm conscious of that. We all share that priority. I'm just conscious as well of the link into the spatial strategy itself. Is that notion, isn't it, to have a debate about where you want development to go based on 18,000 houses is Hobson's choice. You just don't want to have that debate because actually you don't want to destroy the green fields, we don't want to destroy the town centre, we don't destroy our villages, we want to have a proper debate. So where should the housing go? Because we know we need housing. We do need affordable housing, and I mean affordable. We do need to see some development in our borough to support local need. That's given. I just think the quality of the debate around 18,000 houses, we can't have that debate easily or in any sense of reason. So unless that gets changed, I think actually we're going to be going round in circles. So Cabinet, please help us here. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but find the spine to join us in that regard as we do, and let's try and push back against the government in the way we should do. And, you know, fingers crossed, let's say what the new Prime Minister does. Is she going to honour what she said to the Tory party members? That she's going to do away with the 300,000 figure, that it will be based upon local need and a local assessment, and that it can be a proper debate that we can have in Basingstoke about the proper number of houses that we genuinely need to grow properly. And I don't think the debate about growth and expansion is a bad way of splitting it either. Expansion, I think, is a word used by others that was very bad, and I think growth could be something quite positive if we choose to make it so. So yeah, the housing numbers is important. I second Councillor McCormick's motion, and I will go so far as to say what I said originally when I wanted to move something, to reject the actual spatial strategy based on those numbers.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any more comments? Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wish to add my voice in support of Councillor McCormick and Councillor Harvey. I'm glad to hear that Councillor Harvey has been paying attention to our future Prime Minister, and I hope that we can have your vote in an election, if there's a general election coming up. She's had some very good policies that are there. But no, getting back to the getting back to the matter at hand. I mean, in all seriousness, this committee has implored Cabinet to reject the number. This council has implored Cabinet to reject this number. I have faith that our Cabinet will listen to us. We're not saying no development. We're saying sustainable development, making sure that the infrastructure is there in place, and that we meet our local housing need and not a nationally imposed target. But I'm very glad that this is a cross-party coming across, and hopefully Cabinet listens to the message and takes that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McIntyre. Does anybody else want to make comment on the housing number? Okay, Councillor Konesko.
I probably should say in response to comment that it absolutely is cross-party, and I'll be supporting this motion as well on behalf of the Lib Dems.
Councillor Cubitt, please.
Clarification, Mr. Chairman, as to what we're voting in on this motion. Is it to reject the spatial strategy on the basis of the housing numbers?
As I understood it, it was to reject the housing number, but maybe Councillor McCormick can enlighten us.
Reject the housing numbers, not reject the strategy in its entirety. I think that would require another motion.
Certainly.
Can I propose two motions then? In that sense, Councillor McCormick has put one on the floor to reject the housing numbers, and I'll happily second that so that his motion can go to the floor. But I would also say that I reject the spatial strategy based upon those numbers.
Thank you, Councillor. I was going to come back to you at the end, okay, about your spatial strategy, but we might as well take it now. Okay, Councillor Tomlin, please.
I'll be happy to second Councillor Harvey's motion.
That is the one rejecting the spatial strategy, is that correct? Based upon the housing number. Okay, so let's take a vote on the first motion, which was Councillor McCormick's motion, seconded by Councillor Harvey, which is to reject the housing number. All those saying aye? Okay, it is unanimous aye. Okay, okay. So that motion is passed. Okay, I'm moving on to the second motion, which is for us to reject, or we're recommending that we reject the spatial strategies currently based on the current housing number. Is that correct? Okay, all those for it? Okay, that's 7. What? So sorry, please keep your hand up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Those against? Councillor Kanaska, which were you voting for? Was that for it? For it. Okay, so that's 8. Okay. Those voting against it? Okay, 1, 2. Okay. Is there any abstentions? No? Okay, so that motion is agreed as well. Okay. The time is 8 o'clock. I'm proposing a quick 5-minute break. Okay, and then we'll get back to it. Okay, thank you very much.